Well, hello, everybody. Check out your, turn on your speakers, check your microphones.
Scott.
It's been a while.
Hello,
Some
Roberto.
of us,
How are you
like
doing?
me, have forgotten how to do this.
Great to see you, Scott. So you made a dash across town?
I actually ended up, there was a cancellation and some stuff today, and then had to, which allowed me to be here, which is always wonderful.
Fantastic. Great to see you.
And I see PJ Taylor from my office. Michael Goldenberg, are you in Florida or are you up on the west side of Manhattan?
I'm on the Upper West Side.
All right, good to see that you're back working. Okay, people are back in New York. And
Absolutely.
how is the Upper West Side of Manhattan?
I'm sorry, John, what about the Upper West Side?
And how is the Upper West Side of Manhattan? Last time we had this show,
Well, I'll let Roberto answer that, being that he lives up here. And,
We're 4 blocks away from each other right now.
and spends a lot more time up here than I do. But to me, it's what it's always been. It's been fantastic.
Yeah, it's great.
What do you
West
think?
Side is
What do you think, Roberto?
I think it's fantastic. I mean, life is back. I mean, and we're 70, in my opinion, we're kind of 70% back. So we have a lot of runway for a lot to happen. What's it like up there in Connecticut? Slowing down?
No. We had a lull in August, which is normally the case anyway. The difference was this year that there's normally a bit of an uptick in inventory that comes on right after Labor Day, and that didn't happen. So a lot of people took a break if they were. There's probably more sensitivity to school timing than Manhattan. So by August, you lose those people that they don't have the option to buy and close on a house by August. And then probably the same for you guys. A lot of people were on vacations that they either missed last year or were on anyway for this year. A lot of buyers that I have were waiting for that little blip in inventory, and it really didn't happen. So we've got really busy again.
So your inventory has not increased since Labor Day?
I mean, not to any large degree. Things have trickled on, but it's really not been, it hasn't been enough to satisfy who's out there. So yeah, I've been very busy in the last 3 weeks, and I'd be busier if there was more on to show people.
Right. That's a little bit of what's happening in the Hamptons, and it's slowing down just because there's nothing to sell. But for us, our inventory a year ago was like 9,500 units, and now by the end of summer it was 5,900. So that really, really contracted, and it was in that slow time period of August, September that it just slowed down. But now everything's starting to come back, and our inventory is getting up into the 6,000s. So we're starting to see a little movement on that part.
Early spring, we were down to about 2. I looked in early spring, it was under 300 single family listings for sale in Greenwich. And then it bipped up, a lot of transactions over summer, and it got down to 260 again a couple of weeks ago.
Wow.
There's a few more things on now, but it's, what do you think, John? I presume it's the same story for you, right?
absolutely. But before I begin, hold on, it's 4:04. I want to introduce everybody to Rob Johnson, the #1 agent in Connecticut, and Lisa Lippman is our other co-host. She is the #1 agent in Manhattan, and that makes this a power couple for the season premiere of season 2 of Boroughs and Burbs. And I am so happy that you two joined us, and because we have a lot to talk about after 6 months off the air. So welcome, Rob. Welcome, Lisa.
Thank you, John.
Can't hear you,
Very
Lisa.
happy to have you. Can't hear Lisa.
Can't
Say
hear
hi,
you.
Lisa. There you are.
Sorry, there were a lot of traffic. I should have been at a desk, and I'm not. I'm in the car. As you can see, I'm not driving though. But there's a lot of traffic in Manhattan, so that's good.
That is a sign of a busy agent when you are what? I mean, I guess it could be worse. You could be on the subway, but hopefully you're getting ferried between $20 million listing and $30 million listing. Yes.
I'm getting ferried between listings for sure, negotiating everything in between.
Okay.
That's the way she
So-
rolls.
We were just talking about, I guess, the change since we were last on the air, but last on the air was May, but we talked to Lisa, I guess, 2 months after the New York market opened, and you had already done $40 million worth of deals on the table. What's changed in the year since we had you on the show?
So basically what's changed is that the prices have gone up. So we kind of knew that would happen. So, when we started opening up, things were sort of trickling in. There was definitely some pent up demand, people starting to buy. But at first it was really sellers who were very negotiable and buyers who were looking for really good deals. And there were enough people like that around that deals were happening, and it felt good because deals hadn't happened in a few months. But no one kind of knew when things would get better. So it stayed like that for a while. And basically in January, when the vaccine was announced and people started getting it, and Biden was elected, and there was, a change, and people knew who the new president was, et cetera, the market started really going nuts. And it was like a spigot that had been opened that had been, kept closed for a while. And January, February, March, and even April were pretty crazy. I would say that we don't have that same craziness, that same freneticism, because again, there was a lot of pent up demand. People had made a lot of money on Wall Street, or in the market, I should say, and people hadn't bought anything and they hadn't gone anyplace. And so I saw a lot of people buying new apartments, people buying pied-à-terres, people upsizing, people coming in from the burbs where they had sold their houses in places like Greenwich and other parts of Connecticut, and were happy with what they had gotten for their houses because of people like you. And they were ready to move back to New York, where they still felt that the prices were, a little bit better than they had been for a while. Excuse me for 1 second. Just drop the stuff there. Sorry. And people felt like the prices were a lot fairer than they had been. So since I would say May, things have been a little quieter. And we have, I would say, despite all of the third quarter market reports and people saying things are nuts or not nuts, is we have a very healthy market. I think for the first time in a really long time, we have equilibrium in the market. It's not a buyer's market. It's not a seller's market. It's a fair market. And fair meaning both sides feel that they have some power. And it's a very, very price sensitive market. So if something is appropriately priced, it sells immediately. And sometimes can even go into overbids. If something is overpriced, it may sometimes be difficult to get even somebody to come and look at it. So I really feel like we have two markets out there. And so we still have frustrated sellers because obviously sellers want to hear only the good news. And we have some frustrated buyers because some buyers only want to hear that things are, tough and COVID and, New York's in bad shape. But we have a lot of people who are kind of pleased. They're pleased to be in New York. They're pleased to buy in New York. They feel like, it's fair in New York. They're not buying at the top. Maybe they're not buying at the bottom. They feel like the interest rates are really low. They're happy to be part of New York coming back and hopefully for the US coming back. And, I think that most people in New York really do love urban living. And, for me, a lot of the people I sell to are lucky enough to have a place someplace else, but they don't want to give up having something in New York. So I kind of feel like the people who are going to leave left. And we're back to just, New Yorkers trying to figure out how much they're going to spend, where they're going to live, et cetera, et cetera. And, although if you look at our numbers inventory wise, it looks like we have enough inventory. If you drill down, and I'm sure Roberto agrees with me, if you drill down and you have a buyer who's looking for something and has a certain amount of money to spend and wants a certain neighborhood, there's actually not that much to show anybody. Maybe if you have a 1-bedroom condo buyer and they're open to a bunch of neighborhoods, you have a ton to show them. But if you're talking about a typical buyer in New York saying they want 2 to 4 bedrooms, they want a specific neighborhood, they're going to have a certain budget, there's not all that much to show them.
All right, I want to key on a couple things you said and go right to Rob on this. One thing you said was after a period of frantic activity, you said things are coming back into equilibrium. And I wonder if that's true in Greenwich and Connecticut. You said that you think that people feel that the prices are fair. And I'm wondering whether people think that the prices are fair in the suburbs, fair in Greenwich right now. So what do you say, Rob? Are we in equilibrium, or are things fair? Are things back in balance in Connecticut?
No, not yet. We went through a long phase of being not in equilibrium the other way, though, and it didn't, and it switched to a seller's market pretty quickly. We're still there. I think that one of the problems that we have as agents out here is not with all sellers at all, but with some sellers, the persuading, educating them on the fact that if you price your house fairly, the risk of pricing your house fairly has very little downside these days, and the market will not leave money on the table on the upside. People read a little bit too much press on the as sellers at the moment, and they factor in that that the values have risen a little higher than they perhaps have, depending on what type of product they have. In the same way as if we were having this conversation in 2018, I had a lot of buyers coming out from the city that felt like they could bid 50 cents on the dollar for stuff in Greenwich, and then those guys never bought anything. So yeah, I think we're still a little bit out of whack at certain edges of the market. But we're in a slightly different place than Manhattan right now.
So in a slump, New Canaan had 350 houses on the market. In a normal year, 250. Earlier this year, 100. Today, about 75 single-family homes for sale in a market of 7,000 homes. There's 7,000 homes in this town, and there's only 70 on the market. About the same thing going on in Greenwich?
Yeah, I was out with a buyer at the weekend, and we were looking between 2.25 and 3.2, that type of range in Riverside and Old Greenwich. And I had 5 or 6 things to show them. They asked about Central Greenwich, which is kind of a different submarket, and I pulled the listings up. There were 4 listings in that $900,000 range, and 2 of them were land sales. So yeah, it's still tight.
Now, Lisa, did you really say everybody who's going to leave Manhattan has already left?
Really said that. No, so of course, it's a big city. We constantly have people coming and going, but I do think that's sort of the exodus that we felt for a while. People saying, "Oh my God, I'm done with the city. Maybe I'm done with New York. I'm done with taxes." I think those people left. I'm not seeing too many people say that anymore.
I would agree
I'm
with
actually.
that from my side.
What did you say?
Yeah, I'd agree with that as well, because a lot of people ask me, it's like, are you still seeing all this flood of New Yorkers coming to Connecticut? And I said, well, yeah, it's our main buyer base, so it's always going to be that's the core part of our buyer base. But if we were relying on that for this year, our market would have softened. Last year was characterized by that, and you saw it from your side, obviously. This year, it's been more a national inflation story, and if we were relying just on people jumping ship from Manhattan, we would have normalized. I agree with you from the other side of the fence.
Well, I'll tell you a good story. So I had an apartment on the market since last April. We had a hard time selling it. A little bit of a tough co-op, et cetera, et cetera. We dropped the price a few times because my clients wanted to move out to Long Island, to the Hamptons permanently. And we now had a contract out on it and a bidding war. And they decided not to sell it because they decided they wanted to stay in New York. Mm-hmm. So that's just one little story about what we're seeing. You know, I think that a lot of the people that, and I think I probably said this the last time we spoke, a lot of the people who left were people who had thought about leaving for a while anyway, and they hadn't found their right moment. And this was the kick in the pants that they needed. So we lost some like young families with little kids who were just getting into the like, where are my kids going to school? And it's so expensive and it's hard to get into nursery school. And for $3 million, I don't get such a nice 3-bedroom. I certainly can't get 4 bedrooms. And during the pandemic, they went to stay with a parent or a family member in the suburbs. And it was great. You know, they got a big house with a pool and there was public school. And so we lost a lot of people like that who might have stayed in the city. We lost a whole bunch of people who were sort of thinking to go to Florida anyway permanently as time went on and didn't need a big place here and, you know, taxes or whatever. So we lost maybe some of them a little prematurely to what we would have done. But what we've seen since then, and I'm sure Roberto agrees, we've had some people come back and say, the problem with Palm Beach is it's Palm Beach. And it's not that great in the summer. And I'm not ready for that. And no offense to Palm Beach, I love Palm Beach. And I've even seen some people coming back from the suburbs saying like, it seemed like a good idea, but I realize I'm an urban person. And again, I mean, the suburbs are amazing. I have nothing negative to say about it. You know, it takes a certain kind of person to want to live in New York. And I don't think there's a lot of people who love living in New York who also would love living someplace else. It's kind of a unique thing. And if you have it in your blood, you may downsize here, but I think you're still going to want to keep something here.
I agree.
And, you know, it's interesting what Robert said, because we have a house up in Kent. And obviously when the pandemic hit, that market went absolutely crazy. And we thought about like buying a bigger place up there, and everything was just going for ridiculous amounts of money, and it was nutty. And we didn't buy one because we got into a bidding war for something and we didn't get it. And then there wasn't anything else we liked. And now I'm still watching that market. And I do see that market is softening again. Because I think that, you know, the people who sort of like left New York for a different way of life, that stopped.
I think, but everybody's coming back, but we're only really in the sense of like the actual usage of the city from a standpoint of Midtown and offices, we're only still really about 70% back in my estimation, which tells me that there is a tremendous runway for appreciation in the coming, you know, some buyers consider the market quite expensive and quite busy, and with the inventory being so tight that that they're having trouble getting in. But if they think they're going to have trouble getting in, they need to get in now, when interest rates are super low and there is some inventory, because in the coming years, that whole is going to turn on its head, and it's really going to become a seller's market for sure. Because the price appreciation is going to come, the inventory, especially in new development, there wasn't a tremendous amount of development. That inventory is going to contract a little bit. So yeah. I see upward pressure on pricing in the next 3 years.
I mean, I think that the parts of the city that are probably still super undervalued are kind of the Midtown neighborhoods, because those are the neighborhoods where we don't really have foreign buyers back yet, and we will get them back. And New York is cheap compared to other places in the world. So there's no competition from them now. And I think that will certainly come back. I was just when I was in the car, I was giving a ride back to a young techie buyer of mine. He's a hedge fund guy, but he analyzes tech stocks. And he's buying his first apartment downtown. First of all, he's getting a interest rate from Citi at 1.7 on a 10-year ARM, which is like outrageous. And he said that all the tech companies that are coming to New York, that he thinks that, you know, a lot of the downtown market with young tech people is going to go absolutely crazy also, because they make a lot of money and they're going to want to buy.
You know, the one thing about foreign buyers that could potentially hurt them a little bit is that since May, the dollar has actually been strengthening a little bit. So it is becoming a little bit more expensive.
But knock on wood, it's still considered a safe investment and a safe place to live and a safe place to park money. I mean, you know, I think we started having a lot of South Americans buying here a while back, and I think we're going to get them back.
So Rob, if I was to rank them in order, if all the New Yorkers who left have already left and the panic is over, then why is the Connecticut market so good? Why are prices still so strong? Would you say it's interest rates? Would you say it's the job market? Would you say it's the money supply, a 30% increase in the money supply? Is it all those
So-
stock market winnings?
Yeah.
What's causing this enthusiasm for the suburban market generally?
Well, for me, like I said before, last year I saw it as New York's loss was our gain, and that sort of dynamic was quite correlated. And if we were relying on that to continue, we'd have stabilized. And I think the reason we haven't is that it's not a local phenomenon anymore. If you look at any high-end real estate market across the country, they've all risen in different degrees, obviously. And if you go down to Palm Beach or some of the low tax states, or if you're looking at Texas or Florida in general, the price appreciation in those places has been much higher than Lower Fairfield County. But I think so. It's a national thing, and I think to derail that, we're going to have a major correction in the stock market. But because the individual dynamics in these markets, unless someone's moving out of our market, it's very difficult to get your head around downsizing, upsizing, going to the water, moving downtown within your own market. So, but what's interesting is if I speak to sellers who are leaving this market and they're going to Florida or Texas or wherever, they mentally have no problem looking on Zillow and finding the best thing available that's 50% higher than it was a year and a half ago, but they can't get their head around moving within their own market within a price appreciation of 15 or 20%. And I'm sure you've seen that as well. So what that's caused is that's constricted the supply, and the choices are very limited, which has kept prices high. And there are still plenty of leftover buyers from the city. Don't forget, like a lot of people that left the city didn't necessarily buy last year. So we had a squeeze on rentals. So we've got a lot of people that were owned rental houses. We don't have large landlords out here like the city. A lot of those guys were people that were very patient about selling their house. They'd been waiting for a market like this for 3, 4, 5, 6 years. Those guys have sold into this market in the last 2 seasons. So rental supply went down.
Still is down.
Yeah, and rental demand went up because it was driven by people that were being a little more conservative about their approach to moving from urban areas. They wanted to test out the market in rentals. So the people that have liked what they've seen are still buyers and they're looking. So that there's kind of a lag on that buyer demand, and those guys are still out there. So I think we've still got a little momentum to go in our market, but for different reasons.
Interesting.
Talk to me, either of you, talk to me about the very high end. Do people perceive these $20 million apartments or your waterfront in Greenwich, your waterfront in Bellhaven? I mean, I keep hearing about record-setting sales. Do people feel that this is the top of the market for luxury, or have we got a ways to go?
It's inventory driven as well. I mean, I had a listing last year that was on in the 30s, and I've had 4 unsolicited calls about when it was going back on in the last couple of months. Really good quality waterfront. That wasn't waterfront, but really good quality waterfront, even in crappier markets, has outperformed the rest of the market. If you look back over like a 10 or even 20-year period, if there was more supply on, I think we would have seen more transactions on that. So but it's very few and far between. There aren't many transactions a year in our market that are above 20 million. So it's my opinion is more anecdotally driven than data driven, but Lisa's probably got more.
Lisa does one every week. Lisa, tell me, how is the ultra luxury doing? You're on mute.
You're muted.
Sorry, I'm in the courtyard of my building because I'm afraid to lose you if I go into the elevator of my building. So, and there's some background noise, including a fountain. Anyway, so I do not think that the ultra luxury has hit the top. I think that certain parts of the ultra luxury is very high. So some of the new development with outdoor space has seen really, really high numbers. I think the market that's still a little soft and there's still some opportunity for buyers is Central Park West and Fifth Avenue. There's a lot of really beautiful apartments on Fifth Avenue and Central Park West. And I liken that to being on the water, right? Because we have limited amounts of inventory. There's only so much park front that you have. And I think that market's been ignored a little bit in the last couple of years. And I think that it's due to come back. So I don't think we're even close to the highest there because there has been a lot of wealth created. And I think, you know, in the end, people who spend a lot of money want to be sure that, you know, that what they're buying has long-term value and will hold its value. So I've always been a believer in buying on the park. And just like I've always been a believer in buying on the water, my mother actually told me that. I grew up in the Connecticut shoreline, and my mother always tried to scoop up whatever she could find that was on the water. And I think that part of the market's undervalued. I'm not sure if the super high-end condo market is not overvalued though. That I wonder about.
Lisa, let me ask you something. I totally agree that there's tremendous opportunities along Fifth Avenue and Central Park West. However, what I find is the overwhelming majority of all of those properties need a tremendous amount of work. And that is the one sector of our marketplace that if something needs work, it suffers so badly because no one wants to do the work. And, you know, as opposed to, I bet Rob has a lot less inventory along the water than we actually have along Fifth and Central Park West.
I agree with you, but I think that when you see a recovery, the things that recover first are the shiniest pennies because it's instant gratification and people can get in right away. And I think the stuff that takes a little longer to come back, but may eventually have longer lasting power is really trophy properties and trophy locations. So, you know, the old adage that, you know, location, 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 I always tell a buyer that, you know, remember that that's the most important. So if somebody asks me where they're going to get the best value right now, I tell them buy facing a park. Even if you have to do the work, you'll get some better value because if you create something really beautiful, you're always going to do well with it.
I agree with that. I like that silver penny analogy. And I think I'd have two comments to add to that. I think I'd agree with Roberto that it definitely narrows your base. People don't want to do work, and new construction in the suburbs always transacts over the older listings. But I think it's even more so now because it's very, very hard to get subcontractors to actually work for you because they're all so busy, and the prices to do that work have become incredibly expensive. So it's even harder to sell that stuff that needs, you know, 7-figure renovations.
And how does that compare for you to selling how does that compare to selling just land? Like some of the land that you had mentioned earlier.
Sorry, say again, Roberto?
How does that compare to like when you said some of the properties you were showing to somebody was just land and property? Is also the struggle because you actually have to go through the building process?
Land is recovered. I think the hardest thing to sell is something that doesn't have a defined purpose. So if it's land, it's reasonably easy to price, and you can get people that want to start afresh on definitely on good quality land. But if it's something where there's a certain amount of value in the structure, but you don't really like that structure and you could tear it down, but you're overpaying for land and stuff that's like a little grayer is much trickier for people to get their head around.
Yeah.
So I have an example of that. I have Paul Simon has 30 acres in New Canaan with a beautiful 1930s house on it. And it's been sitting on the market. And remember, we just came through the pandemic where people value land. And Paul Simon has got to be scratching his head right now saying, why has my 30 acre property in New Canaan not sold? If people are valuing land, and I've taken the price, and he's taken the price down from 15 to in the neighborhood of 10. So I know that there's plenty of buyers out there with $10 million of money, 10 million for a trophy property. It's to both of your point that people can't want something that's done It has high ceilings and great technology and is modern and easy. People are buying easy. And
one
just
thing
like the old inventory along Fifth Avenue and Central Park West will have its day, you know, some of us think that these old gray ladies out in Connecticut are going to come back. What do you think, Rob?
I think it's interesting that last year, I know there was a very dramatic demographic shift. At least for last year, it's less obvious this year, but a lot of my buyer clients in the middle of last summer were considerably younger than they had been on average. And what that meant was the newer, easier stuff became more desirable. There's always, like I said, there's always a preference for, if you look at the absolute amount of buyers, for new and easy. And it was mainly because people want instant gratification, but it became even more so last year because my buyers became younger. They genuinely were both they're both still in their main careers. They might be just starting to have kids, and they just didn't have the time. So that gap between the stuff that needs work and doesn't need work became, in my mind, a bit more exaggerated. Having said that, there is always if the house is easier to work on, I think a lot of it depends on where the buyers grew up, but there's always there is a sub-market of people that do like older houses. I mean, I just was working with a client of Roberto's on a guy that had a genuine preference for that, didn't want new construction at all. But it's probably less, those guys are in a minority.
You know, what's interesting is, you know, so there's a couple things that are different where we are here, is that the older, more charming buildings, let's say in the A+ locations, the difference they have also between the new stuff is that they're co-ops versus condos. And that's something that is, I think, very palpable. So what I have found is, for instance, I have 2 really beautiful apartments on the market on Central Park West. Neither one of them needs any work, but they're both buildings that require 50% down and board approval. And I've shown them a bunch. And for the people who have come and haven't made an offer and have bought something else, all of them have gone to new construction. Now, I don't think it's because the apartments weren't done enough. It's because they opted for a condo for whatever reason. So that's one thing that we have that sort of, it's not just the old versus the new, it's the way you can purchase it. And I think that has something to do with sort of the new money out there and interest rates and how you can finance, and people being sort of, in some ways, we're all sort of public figures at this point, but there's also a thing with privacy now, maybe more than ever, because people can see everything. And, you know, I know Roberto and I have talked about it. I talk about it with a lot of brokers who have worked in Manhattan for a long time, is I do think once we see co-ops becoming more open-minded about purchases and trusts and things like that, that we're going to see the old beauty in A+ location co-op market go up a lot. And I think that's sort of the other thing that we just kind of need to wait for. I think it's going to happen. I can't be sure, but I do think it's going to happen. I've seen some softening with some of the East Side buildings where they went from all cash to allowing financing, not looking for triple or quadruple the amount of the price of the property and liquid assets, hoping that they attract sort of some younger buyers. But that is one thing that we have. It's not just old and new, it's also the manner in which you can purchase something.
Right.
But, you know, it's interesting, Rob, about your market also in Greenwich, because like where we are in Connecticut and Kent, nobody wants new construction. Like the new construction is cheap. Everybody wants old.
I can see that. I can see that tying into the aesthetic that people tie into with a much more rural place. It'd be the same if you were looking in like a horse farm area, or and that's it's a second or third house market,
right?
For those type of houses that obviously there are some people that are just live in Kent, but for the way you're looking at Kent, that's not the case. Greenwich is a primary. There are obviously plenty of people with multiple houses, but the vast majority of residents, it tends to be their primary residence. So that probably explains a lot of the difference.
What can I expect from both of you in spring 2022? A lot of people say that the seasonal softness is just, something that's going on in September and October, but they expect prices to reflect the short inventory in the spring. When we polled all of the major national economists, they talked about price growth in the teens this past year, but they said next year we're going to see growth in the 6 to 9% nationally. Do you think we're going to see 6 to 9% in Connecticut, in Greenwich? Do you see it also, Lisa, in New York? 6 to 9% growth of prices?
I think we're going to see a 5% increase. I'm a little wary because, one of the reasons that the market is so good is interest rates are low and people have made a lot of money in the stock market. But there's also probably been a little bit of move to buy hard assets because people are a little worried. So I don't know. I think people are, some of it's going to have to do with whether we can get Delta under control. Some of it's going to have to do with what happens with the stock market. I personally don't see the real estate market going up 10 to 15% by the spring. I think that if it goes up by 5%, but 5% is a lot.
Any categories going up 15%?
I don't think so. I mean, I personally think that we have a pretty well-valued market. I don't think we have an undervalued market. I think that it's fairly valued now. I think there's some room for growth. But I don't see it going up more than 5 to 10%. And by the way, I'm a huge cheerleader for New York. So it's not that I just don't see real estate going up that much more. I think that, people forget that it's not like the stock market. There is somewhat of a cap on how high the real estate market can go, because not everybody earns their money in the stock market. And if incomes don't go up that much, then the real estate market has to start softening.
All right, Rob, come on, tell me. Greenwich waterfront's going up another 15%, isn't it?
Well, it's really difficult. It's really difficult to deal in headline numbers, and obviously New York has Lisa has a massive amount of submarkets involved in the numbers that she kind of glossed over. So for what's good for one is not good for another, and the same in Greenwich. I would say last year and this year have the most saleable properties have gone up 10% last year and 10% this year. I don't see that necessarily being sustainable. I'd agree with Lisa on that. I think it's a combination of a lot of things, and most of them are way above my pay grade. But I would say, are low interest rates sustainable into next year? I don't think so. I think the government has to fess up on the fact that inflation is absolutely nowhere near what they say and do something about it. But on the flip side, I do see a lot of unrequited love with buyers out there. There's a, so if we're looking out to next spring, I know that there are a lot of people in my market. They're either on my buyer list or on all the agents' buyer lists out here that want or need to buy a house here in the next 6 months. So I see the appetite. They're going to get the best deal they can. I don't think another 10% next year is as likely. I think more modest gains are probably more likely.
But you see those gains in both of our markets. I mean, for us, I see it being a very moderate degree of appreciation, but running for several years. I don't see anything, that is going to disrupt that. Even with interest rates going up, I still think it's going to moderate and the demand will balance that out. You think that, Lisa?
I agree.
No.
I agree. I mean, I think we're going to continue to have a healthy market for a while, but that's why I'm not willing to say that it's going to go up by more than 5%. I think that, what happened in 15, 16 is things had gone up a lot from after the financial crisis. And then we started softening by the end of 16 and 17. And I think it's because there ends up being a little like a runaway train. Sellers just keep raising their prices and there's pushback eventually. So you know, if that won't be good, and that will slow down our market. I mean, you know, I'm sure Greenwich buyers have become the same. There's complete transparency now out there. Buyers know what everything has traded for in the past. And to a degree, people are not just going to plop down any amount of money to have what they want. They still look at where things have traded in the past, and you can't fool people.
Yeah, and they have a lot more information these days. And the thing that's really driven our market really was the fact that the sellers, they had to acquiesce to what the demand was. So the prices did gravitate down, and that created the velocity. And, you know, deals, it becomes contagious, and then everybody wants to jump in the party and they say everything's okay. And then the market starts moving. And that's what we've been on for the last bit.
Yeah, there was some interesting behavior this year that I didn't even see last year that I think is a flag for things not being sustainable. So from not having done this before, I did it 3 times in 1 month in April, where I got contracts wired, signed, no inspections, no contingencies, done within 24 hours. And I did that 3 times in April. That doesn't happen normally in a normal market. And to have buyers willing to buy houses on those terms, I don't think is it's not sustainable behavior. So I think just from like little things like that, I think we're not due a correction, but I think there was a bit more. There'll be a little bit more sanity going forward.
And we have a more sane market. Like, even where there's bidding wars on things, we had that in like 2006 and 2007, where people just did ridiculous things. But that's not really a healthy market.
No, it's not.
Right, Sharon asks, Sharon's my manager, and when she asks a question, I have to ask it. She wants to know, Rob, are Westchester buyers coming to Connecticut? And Lisa, Rob, are our sellers going to Florida? We were talking about that last year. Are they going to Florida? Are they coming out to Westchester, or coming into Greenwich from Westchester?
They always have and gone and come from those markets. So it's not a new thing. I mean, we've got 2 parts of our market that's served by Westchester buyers. One is the downtown Greenwich market, and they're both basically tax refugees from Westchester, but they're just at different ages. So there are people that transfer to private schools that tend to move to Greenwich when their kids are in middle school because they thought they were going to use Westchester public schools, and they end up paying 3 times their real estate taxes and going private as well. So we see those guys, and we continue to see those guys. And then we see.
But a lot was made of tax as an influencer a year ago, both on Florida, Westchester, Connecticut, New York. Tax. Everybody was talking tax. Are they still talking about taxes as a driver?
We before COVID, I felt like the media, especially out of New York, was beating Connecticut with a drum and being highly critical of the political situation in Connecticut, and it's all we'd hear about. You haven't heard that as much before. In my mind, it was driven by very wealthy clients that had got a little younger than normal, but maybe in their 50s. Business owners were moving to. They were driving Palm Beach prices a lot higher well before COVID, and that was turbocharged during COVID. And now I feel like the people that I've spoken to, there have been younger people moving to Florida, but it's not just taxes that are driving them; it's more flexibility in where they can work from. So I spoke to the PM at a large hedge fund who had an office in Greenwich, and I said, "Are your guys using it more because they'd moved to Hudson Yards a couple of years ago?" And he said, no one's there, but we opened up a satellite office in Miami as well as the one in Palm Beach. So it's been, going back to Lisa's point earlier, where it wasn't, I think some of that movement last year was accelerated the decision to leave the city a year ago, but it wasn't the only reason. They've been thinking about it for a while. And I think taxes tend to do the same for a lot of people. Like when the SALT tax changes in 16 came in, I thought there was going to be more movement after you couldn't take real estate deductions from Westchester to Connecticut. And we saw a bit of that, but not as much as I thought we might have done, because unless someone's genuinely thinking about moving anyway, that's just the straw that breaks the camel's back. So I think people have, yes, people are still moving to Florida for slightly different reasons. People are still moving from Westchester for the same reasons.
Lisa, where are they coming from? Where are they going?
I mean, I see people moving to Florida, but generally I see it being older people. I think during the pandemic, we saw some younger people and they told themselves life's easier. It's warm all the time. I'll pay less taxes. My kids can be, running around all the time. That dried up though. We still see people moving to Greenwich and Westchester, but to me, it's really more to have more space, not deal with private school, be able to send their kids to public school. I think, when people have more than 2 kids, New York often pushes them out unless they have loads and loads of money. One of my favorite conversations to have with people is, in my mind, one of the beauties of being really wealthy is that you get to live wherever you want to live and do whatever you want. So I never understand why people move away from where they want to move to pay less taxes. But that's probably more of a political
We're going to go into this. We're going to go into the second hour for that one, Lisa.
And, I'm going to pat myself on the back for paying 52% taxes and living in Manhattan, okay?
I grew up a little boy in Stuyvesant Town in Manhattan, and I used to ask my mother, who is on the show right in the cell next to Lisa, I used to say, why do we live in Manhattan? We could live on a Caribbean island. And she said, yeah, that gets old after a couple of weeks because what's exciting about this area is the New Yorkers, hanging out with other New Yorkers and all the really interesting ideas they have. And she said you'd get bored in a place with nothing but a good view.
Well, I love your mom. Hi, Mom.
So I think that did we see a lot of people who left during the pandemic for warmer, nicer places with a view come back to New York? Are they coming back into New York?
I have seen people do it. I've seen people so I have this other family that sold their 4-bedroom on Central Park West. They moved into a 1-bedroom rental and they have a big place off the coast of Cape Cod. They just called me last week. They're like, and we actually want to buy again. So they're going to buy something smaller. But, I think they realized that being gone wasn't all it was cracked up to be, just like your mother explained it. It's really nice to be in a really pretty place. But if you're in a really pretty place all the time, it's not that interesting anymore. Sometimes you want to see the grit of New York.
But it's like what you said before. It's like people left the city and bought additional places, like an additional place in Florida, not necessarily to leave. That said, the people that have left, I think, are really scratching themselves on the head because they're struggling to get back in some ways.
Fred Whitmer is on the call, and he is a client of Lisa Lippman's, and he sold his New York apartment with Lisa Lippman. Lisa, are you going to sell Fred Whitmer a new apartment? Are you going to lure him back into New York City?
I think if it was up to Fred only, I might, but I'm not sure Valerie will allow it. Am I right, Fred?
Now, did the pendulum swing and that huge price that Fred no doubt got for his place? You could sell him something a little bit less expensive now?
No. Let's be clear about this. Let's be clear about this. First of all, I have nothing but fond memories of Lisa because when she sold us the apartment she sold us the apartment in 2000, whatever it was, 2008, and which we sold in 2019. Yeah. We had come to a deal, but not signed a contract when Valerie said, I'm giving up my Riverside Drive view of the river. And I said to her, Lisa will remember this, I'm not going to pay double to get the apartment we don't have a river view to have one that doesn't have a river view, unless you say I'll never hear. I don't never hear that. I don't want to hear that. And so we called up Lisa and said, we've decided not to buy the apartment we were about to sign a contract for. And Lisa said, well, we'll find you one that you will buy. Didn't try to sell the deal. And that got her the apartment that we sold then and bought at the top of the market in March of 2008. But we had sold an apartment at the top of the market in 2008. And then in 2015, when we really wanted to leave the city, we held on to it and it didn't put it on the market then, which was what we should have done. Instead, we rented it for a couple of years. And when we did put it on the market, Lisa was lucky to have an open house and have the first person who saw it in the open house make an all-cash offer that we sold it on October 30th, 2019, before COVID hit. And there is not a day that goes by that we don't say, thanks be to God, we sold that apartment. True story,
Listen, you got
Lisa?
anything for Fred with a view, with a river view that he can afford?
Of course I do. Of course I do. Especially if he goes, if he goes a little bit further uptown, close to where they live now.
Well,
She's got apartments in her pockets.
I do.
80th and Riverside, 82nd and Riverside was where we were, was a beautiful apartment. Lisa staged it beautifully and we sold it. Thanks be to God.
Fred, you're a great client.
He is a great client and a great human being. You know, one thing I'll just mention, because I'm actually curious about you guys in the suburbs, is what I could sell day in and day out is a 3 to 4 bedroom apartment between $4 and $5.5 million that doesn't need a lot of work. We don't have enough of them. We never have enough of them. That's sort of New York City's moderately rich, regular people. I mean, you know, I'm saying this like only to this audience, people watching the show. But we don't have enough of those. Is that true in the suburbs too? Like we have a lot of things that are sort of too small for people who have more money to spend. And we have a lot of things I find that are 3 and 4 bedrooms that are kind of like 8 to 12 million that a lot of people can't afford. But we don't have enough between 4 and 6.5.
Yeah, I would say the buyer expectation for even before COVID from 3 to 4 million was always underserved. You would get a lot of people coming out saying, I'm sure we'll be able to buy 10-foot ceiling, 6,000 square foot house with a pool for under 4 million. Why can't we find it? And that hasn't got any better, obviously, in the last year and a half. But we had a dead zone on even very high-end new construction between 6 and 10 before COVID, and that the liquidity in that price point has definitely filled in. The supply is tight now, but I would say, yeah, around 4 and 5 million, you're going to get 35 to 40-year-old successful guys coming from the city that want to tick every box, and it's very underserved.
Yeah,
So
we have very interesting.
So I think there's a formula. Tell me if I'm right on this theory, Rob, but I think in New Canaan, where the base level land is $1 million for a lot, to build on that lot is going to require a minimum of $3 million. So we do not have enough inventory at every level under $3 million. At above $3 million, you can find a builder at the $3, $4, and $5 million and find a lot and build a house.
Yeah,
I think that's $2 million in Greenwich and probably $5, $6 million for the house. So at every level under 5 or 6, he doesn't have enough inventory.
Yeah, and I would discourage for a few years, a while back, I was not discouraging, but I was trying to get my clients to be open-minded to buying existing inventory built within the last 10 years, because even before construction went up, you could buy someone else's mistake for less than replacement cost. And you could especially do that in New Canaan. Some of those houses that were very expensively built, I'm not knocking New Canaan, I'm saying their discount to replacement cost was incredible for some of that stuff a couple of years ago. I don't think, I think if you have a really strong desire to build your own house, there are non-financial reasons why you would have wanted to do it back then, especially if it was on the water, which is a different animal. But now it's a little different. I mean, the logistics and the price for building stuff now, and the level of buyer interest means you're not buying, you can't buy stuff below even old replacement costs. So it's yeah, it's a different set of considerations at the moment.
Well, you know, it's interesting. It's a little bit like the concept of buying an unrenovated co-op, right? Because it has some of the same issues. It's a
Mhm.
lot of, you can finance very little, just your land or just your unrenovated co-op. And then it's a lot of cash afterwards, and you have to live someplace else. So it ends up being a lot more expensive than just the overall ticket price.
Right. And if you haven't done it before in a town, you know, if it's the first thing you own in the city or out here, there's a learning curve to doing that, one. And two, I'll try and guide my clients to not make the decisions if they spend a little bit extra on every one of 1,000 decisions, that moves the budget a lot. And guess what? 5 years later, it's not the forever house, the 20-year timeline that you use to justify overspending on everything. So it's very difficult. Renovations have a nasty habit of getting out of control.
Don't they, Scott?
That can definitely happen.
You could go to Scott and make it really clean, super nice and easy, and be in and out and get what you want and in the right way.
So I have a question for you on the commute. Rob, there was once upon a time that people valued Greenwich because it was so close to New York and they could just get into their jobs. And now with the tentative opening up of Wall Street, you know, in-person offices, you know, we're going to do it, we're not going to do it, we're going to delay, you only have to come in 2 days a week, 3 days a week. How has that changed the thinking, Lisa? How has it changed, Rob? Because I'm looking at John DeCenzo, who runs the Westport office, and Pam Toner, who's got a waterfront on Fairfield Beach. And I'm thinking they are getting some of those Greenwich buyers. They're getting the buyers you're losing up the coast.
Yeah, I think the towns further away, I used to be on Wall Street, and I used to sit next to a guy for 10 years from Westport. So, and we'd be at our desks at 7 a.m. So that's a tough commute if you're doing it 5 days a week. But people changed their mindset about commuting last year a lot. It's changed back a little bit as well. So I think there's been a reversion to that, and being closer to the city is a little bit more front of mind. I think some people's work scenario has changed permanently, and other people, they would like it to have done, but it's not. They've got to get back to Midtown again or lower Manhattan. So the value for Greenwich is coming back a little bit in that respect, I guess. I always see it for people that are really sensitive about commute times. It was always kind of a selling point for Greenwich versus Westchester, because you would have a guy or a girl that would be saying that they think that it could get into the office 10 minutes earlier. So I would always say, well, you can get on a train in Greenwich and have a seat for 48 minutes, or you could get on in Rye for 40 minutes and be standing up all the way. It's up to you. So, but I think it's less of a consideration than it was in the summer of 2020.
Roberto, are people coming out to Southampton permanently because they can?
Not really. I mean, I think that there are people that are still, when you had mentioned Wall Street, Wall Street's back. They're back virtually 100% because they've been required to.
Virtually or in the office?
No, they're actually, I mean, sorry, not virtually, it's a bad word. They're actually back and working full time. I mean, so I think there is.
Roberto, my commuter parking lot across the street, empty.
Interesting.
And we have plenty of Wall Streeters in New Canaan.
But I don't think that they're going 5 days a week. I think they're going to be working 4 days a week, things like that, 3 days a week, but they're being required to go back.
Can I
Yeah,
interject?
I agree. I mean, my husband works at Citi and he's required to be there 3 days a week. He's liking being there so much that he's going 5 days because it was like so long not being in the office.
That's a New York.
I actually think that people, it's good for our business because again, the people who were like skipping town to go live in Memphis, wherever they were going because they could, if you have to go into your office at all, then, but you still now also have to have a home office. People are buying bigger apartments because people need an office. They know that forevermore, they've learned how to work from home and they will also work from home.
Can I interject something here? I'm out in Lake Tahoe and I wanted to hear what you're doing back east. But I've got a comment that I just attended a luxury real estate conference and was a presenter in Scottsdale a couple of weeks ago. I wanted to comment on the US population, which is what's driving all this. The US population in 2007 was 300 million people. Today it's 331,500,000 minus, and we were 332, but it dropped because of COVID. But all those people don't have any housing. And in 2008, when the construction industry stopped building anything till maybe 2014 or 15, we're so far behind, we can't stand it. There's no diapers in the store. It's because the population growth. So New York will recover because population growth, but the people that left are probably going to stay away. I've had people move out here from New York. So as far as working out of your home, this is a permanent shift. It may not happen. You may not have felt the effects there yet, but one of my friends, the whole state of Colorado Treasury is no longer working in their office building. They're all working out of their homes. And so they've shut down the building in Colorado. And I've got clients in Silicon Valley that own office spaces being converted to residential because there's no residential housing. So watch for your residential housing to pick up out of vacant office spaces. But I think the population is the big deal. Not only do we have inflation and not only do we have the pandemic, but we got a surge in the population, a 10% increase in 14 years. So put that into your equation and see what you think.
But is that affecting the Tahoe market, the Greenwich market, the New Canaan market?
Well, the Tahoe market is down to about 10% of normal inventory. And in this conference last week, there were people from all over the country. And I asked a poll of the audience, how many people had less than 25% of their normal inventory? Half the people raised their hands. I asked how many had less than 50%. Everybody raised their hands. And nobody had more than 50% of their normal inventory. And that included some of the people from New York that were there.
What's the
So I think
population
this
where you are?
inventory is going to stay low. The prices are going to stay up. And I think, maybe in New York, it might grow 5%, but everywhere else it's just going to keep growing because the cost of, I had some people buying a 9,000, they had a refrigerator fail last week, cost $9,000 to buy a new refrigerator to match what they have. They couldn't find one and get one for 6 months. So they had to pay $13,500 to buy the same refrigerator and get it delivered in 2 weeks. So guess what? It's not over with yet, folks. There's too many people.
Roland, what's the population where you are in Tahoe?
Where we are in Tahoe, maybe 15,000, but we've got our inventory of homes in the whole area here around the north end of the lake and the west shore runs about 1,300. We got 150 homes for sale. In my immediate neighborhood in the ski area, which I have that view every day that you see. I like the view. I'm not going back to a city. I grew up in Chicago, but the people that are here, we have 1,600 condominiums. There's 7 for sale. In our immediate area, we have 800 homes and there's 6 for sale. So inventory is going to stay down low in our area for some time. I just thought you liked that input because you guys are talking about your markets, but I wanted to listen into what was going on back there because I do talk to people from all over the country all the time, and I like to see what's happening in other markets.
Appreciate you being here.
Appreciate your
Roland.
input.
Thanks.
I agree. I'm with Roland on the over under. I think that price appreciation is going to be more than 5% in New York, definitely more than 5 to 9% in Connecticut. And it's for exactly what Roland just said. We have too few houses to begin with, and we've got increasing population.
Keep in mind the population. The population is a big deal, I think, and nobody talks about it. Nobody talks about it in the news. They don't talk about it anywhere else. But if you got too many people, they got to live somewhere, and they were all piling up over the pandemic, and now they're busting loose and they want to get their own place. They're tired of living on top of each other. So that's part of the problem too.
All right, last word from Roberto, Rob, Lisa.
I personally think like Lisa and I had kind of agreed about with regards to Manhattan that we're going to see a nice moderate growth over, and it's going to be healthy and it's going to be fairly balanced for the next handful of years.
Rob?
I think I'm hoping you're right. I think people have been talking about a correction for so long, and I don't know when the next one is. There will be one, but I think we're really subject to that. I think watch out for a lot more new construction coming out the ground with some builders that are hoping that it will carry on, and it'll be interesting to see what happens to it by the time it hits the market in a year and a half's time.
Year and a half. All right, go ahead, Lisa.
You're on mute.
There were screaming children coming in through the courtyard. Sorry. I don't really have anything to add. I mean, I also think it's going to continue to be good. But I do think that the transparency of transactions will temper everything. People are just super smart. People spending the amount of money that you need to spend these days, do a lot of research. They look at a lot of homes. I think that the pandemic created an emergent situation where people went a little crazy buying in the suburbs or wherever they did. And I think there will be a return to normalcy all over. And I personally, having been doing this for 24 years, I work with buyers and sellers. I like it when there's equilibrium. It's the most interesting, enjoyable, fun way to sell real estate because people just don't feel like they're getting screwed. People feel like they have a chance. And personally, I hope it stays kind of with equilibrium.
I'm going to agree with you. I do think that we're going to get to a place of equilibrium because it's not panic buying, it's not panic selling, and that's healthy for your market and our market. But I am going to say that I do think we're going to see price appreciation, and I'm going to go out more than a year and a half. I'm going to when Scott Hobbs, who you heard a moment ago, and I talked about this, he says that the economists he subscribed to say that this bull market could last until 2028, 2029 before we end up having to pay the bill and pay down this debt. So those builders like Scott Hobbs are building for a 7-8 year market. They don't think it's coming down in a year and a half. I hope they're right.
So do I.
Thank you,
All
guys.
right.
Thanks for having me on.
Guys,
Thank you,
Thanks,
Rob.
everybody.
Thank you, Lisa.
Rob and Lisa, thank you so much.
You were
Pleasure.
great.
Hi,
This was
nice to see you,
great-
gentlemen. Thank you.
Take care.
A great content-filled hour. Thank you both.
Bye.
Very interesting. See you
Johnny.
next week on Boroughs and Burbs. See you, Roberto.
Yep, Johnny, take care.
Take care.
Thanks,
Bye.
guys.
Bye, guys.